The ceiling fan turned lazy circles over the Holloway family's dining table, pushing warm air around a room that smelled like roast chicken and canned corn, and the hard, desert dust that crept in through every unsealed seam. Outside, September. Light in San Mesa, New Mexico, bled orange along the horizon, giving the adobe walls the look of cooling embers. 4 plates sat waiting. Steam curled from the pan. A knife rested on the cutting board with a smear of butter like a fingerprint. Someone had poured sweet tea and set a blue plastic cup on a paper placemat, where a child had scribbled a horse running under a sun with too many rays. The radio on the counter murmured about a high school football score and the heat index, its dial glowing like a tiny eye. In the living room, a wind-up tin horse bumped against a rug fringe and clicked in a tired loop. The front door was ajar by an inch, letting in the chalky smell of night. That's what the neighbor on the east side remembered later. The door never left open, not with coyotes nosing the dumpsters behind the market, not with sand whipping. Across the carport, when the wind came down from the plateau, he said he noticed the porch light too, burning after midnight, which was not the Holloway's way. Not Harold, who woke before dawn for his job at the substation. Not Ruth, who liked the house neat and quiet by 9. Not the kids, Micah and Lina, who slept hard on school nights with their shoes left side by side at the foot of their beds, like they were trying to teach themselves order. But no one called then. Not that night. San Mesa was the kind of place where you assumed a thing would make sense if you looked away long enough. By morning, the kitchen was the same, except colder, and a fly had found the chicken. A chair had been pushed back at an angle, like someone stood up fast enough to knock a knee. Another chair was tucked in with the care of habit. The blue cup lay on its side, a shallow pond seeping into the paper horse, bleeding the crayon into a bruise. The dog, a terrier mix named Pinto, scratched at the jam and whined. Harold's work boots sat just inside the bedroom door, where he always kicked them off. Ruth's purse rested on the counter by the fridge with a grocery list folded inside. Onions, school glue, AA batteries, pork and beans for Saturday. Micah's book bag hung from a chair, back with a spelling test signed in Ruth's slanted hand. Lena's hair ribbon lay by the sink like a worm of color. The station wagon, a dull green that never shone even right after a wash, was in the carport under a drift of dust. There were no heavy footprints in the yard, only the light scatter of quail. No broken glass. No loud fight that anyone could say they heard. The house was mid-sentence and then quiet. It was Ruth's sister, married to a postal clerk in town, who let herself in with the spare key on a sunflower keychain and walked through the rooms calling names until she had to stop and hold the back of a chair to keep from sinking. She felt the plates, warm still, but not hot. She touched the radio. The plastic had a little warmth to it too. She checked the beds, which were unmade, as if the night had ended before the day could really begin. She checked the bathroom, where the towels were damp. On the dresser, Harold's wristwatch lay where he always set it, the crack in the glass catching a new line of light. She stood on the porch and looked at the sky and decided she would not cry because crying was for a different kind of emergency than whatever this was. She called the sheriff's office and said the word "gone" 3 times without meaning to. Deputies came. Then a detective from the county seat. Then 2 men in short-sleeved dress shirts with ties as thin as cigarettes who did not introduce themselves but wrote more than the others and told the sister to sit. They photographed the kitchen and the living room in the door jamb and the carport and the rug fringe stuck under one wheel of the tin horse. They dusted doorknobs. They counted spoons. They looked at the fence line and the arroyo and the track, where kids cut through the field to the bus stop. Reporters arrived before noon. They asked the same question with different shapes. Where are they? A boy from across the street said he'd seen a tall man at the Holloway side slider after dark, but when pressed, he said he might have dreamed it. A woman 2 blocks over swore she'd heard a girl crying near midnight, or maybe a fox. People in San Mesa liked to help if a thing could be fixed. This felt like a hole cut out of the day. The inventory included an instant camera, a Land 230, black bellows, strap cracked but intact. A deputy held it like a foreign animal. He thumbed the latch and sniffed the chemical ghost. Empty, he said, and someone else, the thin tie man with the square jaw, wrote, film compartment blank. No evidentiary value. They boxed the camera with a few other items, a bent key, a dried corsage, a church program, and the box sat in a back room of a building that changed hands twice in a decade and then flooded during a monsoon when the roof failed, paper swelled, ink bled. Some things went missing, and nobody could say when. By Sunday, San Mesa got smaller. Volunteers formed a line along the ditch, boots white with alkali. A chopper from Albuquerque beat the air into hot coins, but saw nothing except the math of desert scrub and the long pale thread of Route 60. A man with a German shepherd offered the dog's nose, and the dog told him about rabbits and one dead. Snake in the place where a child had sat and kicked heels against a cinder block 2 days ago, not last night. Church that morning sang louder and then softer. The Holloway's pew stayed empty but pressed in, the way a thing does when everyone pretends not to stare. Theories propagated like goat heads under a bike tire. A cult, Pigellus X. Government trucks nobody saw that somehow everyone heard. Carbon monoxide, said one man who fixed swamp coolers for a living. Except the windows were cracked, and the sister said she turned the thermostat with her own hand and the needle moved. Someone whispered the Herald had a temper. Someone else said Ruth looked tired last month. Someone else said they saw a black falcon with Mexican plates idling by the school, which had nothing to do with anything. You could watch the story start to bend toward a shape that made it easier to sleep. It never got there. The first week, the Holloways were news, and San Mesa was a place you could find on a map by tracing your finger north of the interstate until it stopped at a bluff. The second week, the story moved 1 column left. The third week, school started and the buses ignored the empty corner. A season turned and the wind came colder, and someone painted over the chalk marks on the carport pillar, and Pinto went to live with a retired road worker who taught him to fetch the paper. At Christmas, the church left a poinsettia on the Holloway's porch, and it slumped in the cold, and nobody took it inside. Time does its work even when you fight it. The detective, with the square jaw, transferred to a task force in Las Cruces. The deputy who logged the camera married a nurse and grew a mustache, and later forgot the day he wrote no evidentiary value because he'd written those words 100 times. The sister moved to Gallup. The kids from the neighborhood moved. Away or didn't, and learned how to retell the story in ways that made them sound braver, closer, wiser. Desert Crest Developments folded and reappeared under a different name with a different P.O. box. The house at 419 El Cotillo changed hands on paper twice without anyone moving in. A teenager dared another to sleep inside, and the second boy lasted until the radio hummed by itself and then ran, swearing he heard the tin horse click without anyone touching it. By the early 80s, the county taped a notice on the door about taxes and unsafe conditions. Someone pulled the notice down and used the tape for something else. The roof held mostly. The wind sanded the paint until the color was memory. Year by year, the place made less sound, as if even empty rooms learned to keep quiet. And yet, every so often, a thing surfaced like driftwood after a dry river finally flashed. A church ledger with Ruth's script. A box in a storage unit, mislabeled, full of paper dolls cut too neatly. A county council minute with 3 lines blacked out so dark the paper wrinkled. People forgot, and then somebody new moved to town and heard the story at a cookout and asked where the house stood, and someone pointed with their chin. Sand Mesa's dust took what it could. What it could not, it covered and waited. The camera waited too. It moved from a wet shelf to a banker's carton, to the back of a city salvage truck, to a rattling warehouse on the south edge of Albuquerque, where unpaid lots stacked under silver tarps. A man with a clipboard wrote photography gear, unclaimed, and an arrow. Years layered until decades felt like less. Batteries corroded into white moons. Leather straps went hard. One day in late spring, a bank's cousin got a permit to liquidate a row of units, and the warehouse doors rolled up in hot light, hid objects that had only ever rooms. Card tables unfolded. Masking tape and black marker made prices. People wandered in for the thrill of old things. They picked over ham radios and cracked Pyrex and the smell of furniture that used to mean something. None of them knew the difference between one instant camera and another, between a common corpse and a relic. None of them read the ghost of handwriting on a strip of yellow tape inside a sealed film pack where the ink had gone. Fragile, but not gone. Do not pull. On a Saturday, that threatened rain without delivering it. A woman with a canvas tote and a habit of seeing the thread running under the hem of the world parked near the loading dock, tucked hair under a cap, and stepped into the row of folding tables with no particular intention. Her name was Mara Keene. She made pictures for other people to tell their stories, and sometimes made pictures for herself when silence needed a shape. She was not looking for a haunting. She would have told you she didn't believe in those. She would also have told you, if you caught her right then and asked the right way, that some objects hum even in a loud room, and that humming isn't magic, it's memory with voltage. Her hand paused over a milk crate where metal and plastic slept. The crate was heavy and cool. Beneath a tangle of cords in a tin flash and a leather case with a stiff zipper, she saw bellows folded like a held breath. She lifted the land 230, felt its weight, thumbed the latch, and heard the quietest click, the kind that says something can wake if you insist. The price tag said $5 in a confident hand. She looked down into the open back, saw the sealed pack and the faint ghost of letters in ink that had survived heat, moisture, a flood, an indifferent century. She did not yet know whose kitchen she was about to see, or how a town can keep a secret under the floorboards until someone finally pulls. She only knew the camera felt wrong in the right way, and that sometimes the only way to understand a story that refuses to end is to give it a frame. Mara didn't go home so much as she carried the camera like it was something breakable and headed for the first place where she trusted her hands. The little carriage house she rented behind a dentist's office, a one-room studio with a chipped farmhouse sink, 2 plants that refused to die, and a work table she'd sanded down until the grain felt like skin. She set the land 230 in the pool of her desk lamp, found a screwdriver, and worked slow. The battery door fought her and then gave. She eased out the swollen cells with the care you give a splinter near an eye, wiped the contacts with alcohol, and clicked in fresh AAs. The camera gave a faint hum, a good sign. She popped the film door, just enough to see the sealed pack again, the shoulder of silver, the yellowed strip with those 4 words in bleached ink, "Do not pull." She told herself it had been a joke, a reminder, some uncle's bad idea of mystery. Then she caught the way the letters weren't playful. They were careful. She slid the door shut until it latched. For a long minute she just sat, elbows on knees, chin in her hands, listening to the AC rattle like distant cicadas. She imagined someone in a kitchen with light like honey and a child with a blue cup and a woman with a grocery list. Imagined a hand reaching for this same latch and stopping. "Okay," she said to no one, and pressed the shutter. The mechanism answered with a mechanical sigh, rollers turning, the tab catching, the black and white tongue of the first frame sliding out into her fingers. She laid it on the table and checked her watch. With expired packs, the rule of thumb was more patience than pride. 90 seconds, 2 minutes. Some nights the chemistry surprised you and bloomed anyway. Some nights it gave you a tombstone gray. That never yielded. The first frame dried to nothing. Just black. She slid it aside like a body they couldn't help and pulled again. Second frame. This one developed in patches like low clouds breaking. A table. 4 plates. The suggestion of green beans softened to fog. A ceiling fan. 1 blade catching glare. She squinted, brought the lamp closer, saw the angle. Mid-level, not a child. Not a tall adult, someone crouched or sitting. In the bottom right corner, barely in the frame, a hand gripped the table edge so hard the fingers had gone pale. Not posed. She felt the hair lift along her forearms. "Come on," she whispered, and pulled a third. Hallway now. Yellowed paint, family photos hung in a line that sagged where a nail had loosened. The shot was slightly canted, the way your world tilts when you're moving faster than your feet should go. At the end of the hall, a doorway out to night, and in that cutout, the shape of a child turned away, small bare heels smudged by shadow. She tasted copper at the back of her tongue. She slid the 4th and last frame free. At first, she thought it was the same room emptied by police, chair legs tucked up like someone had apologized to the floor. Then she saw the mirror along the hall, oval with a thin black frame, clouded at the center. Something stood behind the cloud. Not a faces are easy. Your brain makes them from noise, but a vertical shape with the wrong proportion. Too much height for the width of the shoulders. Arms unnaturally long, or the sleeves too dark. The glass had a blue on it like breath. Her room felt colder. She set the 4 prints in a neat row and leaned back until the chair tapped the wall. The camera strap had a label on the underside. Paper turned brittle, the ink half gone. She took a macro photo with her phone and zoomed until the pixels counted off like fences. HLLWY 419 OC Tinleleo. She didn't need the vowels. Her brain filled them. Holloway, 419, Ocotillo. She'd heard that name once in a grocery line, while a woman in front of her told another that Sand Mesa used to be a place. People didn't lock doors until that family. She remembered not wanting to ask. Now she Googled with fingers that missed keys. Holloway Sand Mesa disappearance. County records, Ocotillo. A site called Desert Echo had a scanned clipping. 4 missing from home. Dinner left on table. September, no year in the snippet, but the typeface sold the decade, the tall serif that let every letter breathe. Another archive gave her the year, 1979. The byline was a kid then who became a city editor and then a name on a scholarship. The article had details she already knew from the photographs, and a few she didn't. A winged-up tin horse in the living room, a blue plastic cup tipped on its side, a radio left on low to a station that no longer existed. A deputy's name, Cabrera. A detective with a jaw cut like an awl, R. Miles. There was a line that made her stomach go flat. Evidence collected included 1 instant camera, film compartment empty. Her eyes flicked to the contraption on her table. "Empty my ass," she said softly. She should have slept. Instead, she drove. Sand Mesa was 2 hours in night traffic, and less when the highway fell open in a way that asked your best judgment and gave back your worst. The desert at night can feel like a lid closing. Headlights paint the world small. When she rolled into town, The cafe at the corner of Main already had chairs inverted on tables, and the clerk at the fuel station handed her a receipt without making eye contact because everyone is tired in the desert at midnight. The streets in the older neighborhood were named for things that thrive where they shouldn't: Ocotillo, Prickly, Barrel. 419 sat under a palo verde that had decided to live no matter what. The porch sags were the same kind you see on the face of someone who's been told to wait too long. The window by the door had been boarded at some point and then unboarded, and then covered with a curtain the color of old teeth. A county sticker, half peeled from the door, warned of unstable flooring, and the words nitrogen monoxide entry had been traced by a finger bored enough to go over letters again and again. Mara didn't go in. Not then. She stood at the fence and took a photo of the house and another of the square of sky above it, and a third of her own shoes, to mark where she'd been when common sense told her to stop. Something moved behind the curtain. It could have been a draft. Houses breathe. But motion has qualities, and this had a tension in it. She drove back to her studio with the camera seat-belted like a child. Dawn made the blinds pale. When she finally slept, she dreamed of hands in a mirror reaching from the wrong side. She woke to her phone buzzing a little after 9. The caller ID said unknown, which for freelancers meant either a check or a headache. Ms. Keene? A woman's voice asked, brittle from cigarettes or years of whispering in libraries. This is Ana Ruiz at the County Records Annex. You left a message about the Holloway file. I did, Mara said, sitting up fast enough to pull the sheet off one foot. You're lucky. Half of it's gone to mold or Reno, but the microfilm still spins. You can use a reader if you're here by noon. It's cooler then. Mornings the machines act like old men. I'll be there in an hour. The annex was a low bunker of a building with windows too small for the heat and a carpet that drank the sound of shoes. Ana was the kind of clerk who looks over her glasses and through you at the same time. She led Mara to a machine that hummed like a hive. Mara scrolled. Headlines flashed by like past places on a road trip your father refused to stop for. She stopped on the photo she knew she would find. The Holloway dining room with a table, but without the hand on the edge. Cropped tight, the absence loud to anyone who knew to listen. The caption mentioned no signs of struggle, and foul. Play not ruled out. The report below included an evidence list with instant camera, land 230, and the note beside it that made Ana snort softly when she read it over Mara's shoulder. Film, empty, no evidentiary value. They always wrote that when they didn't have time, Ana said, or when the thing that might matter looked like it would take more than a week. Who signed it? Mara asked. Ana leaned, tapped the initials with a red-capped pen. RM. Miles, she said. He left. People said promotion. She said the last word like it meant something else. There were minutes from a council meeting 2 weeks later about unsafe structures and public nuisance abatement. 3 lines had been blacked so hard the paper showed stress. One read only as consult with, and then a fossil of ink like char. There was a memo from the sheriff about resource allocation and a note to log anonymous calls coyotes, sounds at night, with a bracketed addendum. Prob, teens. It goes quiet after the second week, Ina said. Then every few years somebody writes a think piece, and they send a photographer to make that house sad again. Mara copied names and dates into her notebook. She asked Ana where deputies boxed evidence in 1979. The back building behind the old courthouse, Ana said. Then it flooded. Then they moved most of it to a warehouse on the south edge. Then they auctioned what wasn't tagged to cases that still bite. What did you find? Mara looked at the woman long enough to test. For danger. She saw patience instead. The camera, Mara said. from a liquidation with a sealed pack. Somebody wrote, "Do not pull." I pulled. Did it sing? It did. Sometimes the desert keeps things cool enough, Aina said. Sometimes it keeps them mean. There's a mirror in the hall, Mara said before she could stop herself. Oval, black frame. You can see something behind it if you let your eyes go soft. Aina nodded once. Houses built then have dead spaces, she said. Between studs, behind mirrors, under stairs. Cheap insulation, cheaper carpenters. You hear about kids crawling in and scaring their mothers. You hear about men crawling in and scaring everyone. Mara left the annex with the kind of list. That changes how you walk. Names to track, a deputy to find, a question about why a camera with film inside had been declared empty, why the city chopped the file to pieces and then tried to pretend the pile was whole. She stopped for coffee and a breakfast burrito she would not taste and made 3 calls. The first was to a sound engineer friend who once taught her how to pull a whisper from a noisy tape. The second was to a woman she knew in Albuquerque who did salvage on ruined documents and owed her a favor. The third was to a number she'd found on an old forum where polite people argued about impolite cases. Someone who posted as Arroyo_eyes and claimed he'd lived on Ocotilla the summer of '79. No one picked up. By late afternoon, the sky went to steel and then let rain fall in fat drops that smelled like pennies. Mara set the 4 Polaroids on her work table under a sheet of acrylic so the humidity wouldn't warp their already fragile layers. She took high-res scans and pushed the sliders until the grain looked like sand under a magnifying glass. In the hallway shot, she found the oval mirror's edge catch light in a scatter that suggested fingerprints wiped, where someone reached and someone else reached again. In the last frame, she found, along the right margin, the faintest ghost of a second reflection, not in the mirror at all, but in the glass of a picture frame hung opposite. A mouth and an O, the way mouths go before a shout or a name. She lined up the police photo from the microfilm beside her frame and found the angle that would make them cousins. The official shot did not show the oval mirror at all. Cropped out. She wrote that in her notes and circled it until the ink bled. Night came early with the storm. San Mesa at a distance haloed by the kind of lightning that photographs itself. Mara sat on the floor with her back to the couch and read the clippings again until sentences broke into shapes. She read the grocery list again. Onions, school glue, batteries. She looked at the camera on the table and the new batteries she'd bought that morning. She tried to tell herself. It meant nothing. The door to her studio knocked then. 3 quick knuckles, not the rhythm of a neighbor. She stood and tried to see through the peephole with a heart that banged. No one. She opened to the screen and found an envelope that had bloated a little with the rain. No stamp, her name handwritten in a careful block. Inside was a single photograph, not a Polaroid, not old inkjet gloss, edges crisp. It showed the front of 419 Ocotillo from the sidewalk. Yesterday light, last night's car in the background where she had parked. Her shoulders tightened in a way that made her feel taller. Someone was telling her they'd seen her see them. She flipped the photo. In neat blue ink, if you pull, you finish. She placed the photograph beside the 4 she'd made like a new card in a deck. She didn't sleep much. When she did, she dreamed of a house teaching itself to look back. In the morning, before the coffee finished, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It read, "You're looking at the wrong thing. The mirror isn't for you. The wall behind it is." Mara didn't remember choosing to drive back out. Only the way the highway leaned her into San Mesa like a tide she couldn't refuse. The photo left at her door sat in the passenger seat, face down, as if she could keep its stare off her skin. The sky was raw blue. the desert wet from last night's rain. Everything smelled alive, but too alive. Like the desert was covering Rot Dot, she parked 2 streets over from Ocotillo, slipped her camera bag over her shoulder, and carried a flashlight. She told herself was just for rotten floorboards. The Holloway house loomed the way it had before, sagging, stubborn, ribs of paint curling. A county lock still dangled from the door, but the side gate was open. She ducked through. The backyard looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. Swing set rusted into the dirt. A bird bath cracked down the middle, weeds shoulder high. Mara's breath felt like it echoed. She crouched by the sliding glass door, still boarded. Instead, she tried a window half hidden by shrubs. The latch was broken. She pushed. The glass gave with a low groan. She slipped inside. The air was colder, stiller than outside, like someone had sealed the house to keep time from moving. The living room was stripped bare. No couch, no TV, just indentations in the carpet where furniture had once stood. Dust patterned everything, except a trail faint smears of feet or hands leading toward the hall. Mara followed. The hallway was narrower than the photo made it seem, walls pressing close. Family pictures still hung, glass fogged with age. She raised her light, saw the oval mirror she already knew too well. Black frame, clouded surface. She stepped closer, lifted her hand, and knocked. Hollow dot, the message from the unknown number pulsed in her head. The wall behind it is. She pressed at the frame's edge. One side shifted, a seam giving. Her throat went dry. She pulled, and a panel popped loose with a soft cough of dust. Behind it, a dark opening about 3 feet high. A crawl space. The smell rolled out, first mildew, insulation, something sour, human. Mara covered her mouth with her sleeve. She aimed her flashlight into the black. The beam caught wooden beams, old pipes, spider webs, and deeper inside, a shape, not moving. Her chest clamped, but she forced herself in. The space was tight, knees and elbows scraping, but the shape came clearer. A cot, thin mattress collapsed inward. Next to it, a crate. On top, a cracked plastic cup, blue dot her. Breath hitched. She leaned closer. On the crate lay a Polaroid, face down. She reached for it with gloved fingers, turned it over. The photo was of a girl, maybe 8 or 9, hair tangled, eyes wide with terror, rope around her wrists. The background matched this crawl space, the pipes, the insulation. Someone had photographed her right here. On the bottom edge, in faded pen, "She still cries." Mara froze. The silence pressed like weight. Then she heard it, a sound from deeper in the wall. A breath, shallow, ragged, too steady to be imagination. Her heart lurched. She killed the light. The dark swallowed her. She held still, listening. The breathing grew louder, closer, then stopped. Mara scrambled backward, elbows tearing on fiberglass. She burst into the hallway, shoved the panels shut, and stumbled into the living room. Her own pulse hammered in her ears. The house creaked. Floorboards above groaned like weight shifting. She didn't think she ran. Through the window, back to the yard, through the gate. She didn't stop until she was inside her car with Thee. Locks down, hands shaking so hard she almost dropped the keys. Her breath came in gasps. She stared at the house. The curtain in the front window shifted, just a little, like someone had been watching. Back at her studio, Mara spread the new Polaroid on the desk beside the first 4. The girl's eyes stared back at her. It wasn't one of the Holloway children. From the news clippings, this was someone else. She wrote in her notebook with a hand that barely held steady. Evidence of captivity after disappearance. Crawl space used. Girl unidentified. Breathing heard present tense. Her phone buzzed. Another unknown text. You went inside. Good, but you're not done. South wall cellar. That's where the rest waits. Mara stared at the words until the letters blurred. Someone knew where she had been, what she had found, maybe even how fast she'd run. Someone who was still watching. She looked at the photos again. The table, the hallway, the child in the doorway, the mirror, and now this girl tied up in the walls. Every image was a message, a fragment, and every fragment pointed the same direction. Back into the house. The desert sun was gone by the time Mara parked near Ocotillo again. She hadn't planned on returning so soon, but the message south wall, cellar, had gnawed at her until it was louder than her own pulse. The Holloway house waited in silhouette, its roof lying jagged against a bruise-colored sky. The street was dead. No porch lights, no cars, no kids. Only the hum of distant cicadas and the hollow sound of her own breath. She carried a smaller bag this time. Flashlight, recorder, gloves, crowbar, no camera. She didn't want anything slowing her hands if she had to crawl fast. The gate hung open as if waiting. Mara ducked through, pressed her shoulder against the familiar window, and slid inside. The air hit her like a sealed tomb. Damp plaster, stale wood, something faintly metallic. She moved quickly through the living room, down the narrow hallway, where the mirror loomed. She didn't pause. Not tonight. The kitchen door at the back of the house opened to a set of stairs descending into dark. She hesitated at the top, flashlight trembling in her grip. The cellar smelled worse than the crawl space rot layered with damp earth. She stepped down. Concrete walls boxed her in, patched with crude boards. Shelves lined one side, empty jars, and rusted tools scattered across them. At the far wall stood an old wooden cabinet. South wall. Just where the text said, Mara approached slowly. The cabinet was bolted to the wall with screws gone black from rust. She pried at one side with the crowbar until the wood shifted with a groan. Behind it, the concrete was different, rougher, cracked, like it had been patched. She pressed her ear close. Hollow. Her pulse roared. She scraped at the seam, pulling plaster until her gloves slipped on something soft. Cloth, a bundle wedged. Into the cavity. She dragged it free. Wrapped in filthy burlap, tied with twine, was a parcel no bigger than a shoebox. She set it on the floor, hands shaking as she worked the knots loose. Inside, stacks of Polaroids, curled with age. Her throat went dry. The first photo was of a woman, late 20s maybe, tied to a chair in what looked like this very cellar. Her face bruised, mouth gagged. The second showed a child, not Sammy or Rose. Holloway, another girl, older than the one in the crawl space photo. A date was scrawled in the white border, October 1972. Mara's hands trembled as she flipped through. There were dozens. Children, women, even men. All bound, some crying. Some blank-faced, each framed with the precision of posed shots. Not random snapshots, exhibits. On the bottom of the stack was one last Polaroid. Mara's breath caught. The frame was darker, newer. The paper edges weren't yellowed. It was her Mara herself, standing outside the Holloway fence 2 nights. Go, camera bag on her shoulder, staring at the house. Her vision swam. Someone was still here, still taking pictures. The cellar creaked above her, dust falling like ash. A footstep, then another, slow, measured. She snatched the Polaroids, stuffed them back in the burlap, and killed her flashlight. The dark closed over her. She pressed flat against the wall, breathing shallow, as footsteps reached the top of the cellar stairs. Silence stretched. Then a voice, low and even, floated down. You weren't supposed to see those. Mara's chest seized. She didn't answer. The footsteps lingered, then retreated, slow, deliberate, as if giving her time to wonder if they'd return. She held still until her lungs burned, until the only sound left was the tick of pipes. When she finally scrambled back up the stairs, the kitchen was empty. The door stood open to the night dot. She fled through the window, clutching the burlap bundle to her chest. In her car, she slammed the locks down, hands shaking so hard, she dropped the keys twice before the engine caught. She didn't stop driving until the house was a smear of dark in her rearview mirror. Back in her studio, she spread the Polaroids. Across the desk, dozens of faces stared back at her mute witnesses, each trapped in their square frames. Victims no one had ever counted. Her notebook lay open. She wrote with frantic strokes. South wall cavity contained Polaroids. Victims extend beyond Holloway family. Presence and house male voice. Sighed, you weren't supposed to see those. Final photo. Me. Taken days ago. She dropped the pen. Her reflection in the darkened window looked pale, hollow-eyed. The photos weren't just fragments of the past anymore. They had caught up to her. The photos covered every inch of Mara's desk, each one an accusation, each one proof that the Holloway case hadn't ended in the 70s. Her studio smelled of dust and fixer chemicals, the old air clashing with the sharp new fear in her lungs. She hadn't slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the last Polaroid, the one of herself outside the fence. That meant someone had been close enough to see her, close enough to frame her through their lens. She forced herself to breathe. She had to think like a photographer, like an investigator. The photos were the story, and the story had a timeline. She began arranging them in order of the dates scratched on their borders. October 1972, December 1974, March 1976. They ran. Like a dark diary, year after year, new faces, new victims, the same cellar background. The Holloway family weren't the only ones who had disappeared. The house was a machine, swallowing lives and spitting out images. But between the old Polaroids and the new one of herself, there were gaps, entire years missing. She wondered if those photos had been hidden elsewhere, or if they had been destroyed. The sound of her phone buzzing made her jump. Unknown number. Against her better judgment, she answered. A man's voice. Calm. Too calm. You handled the photos. Mara froze. You shouldn't have done that, the voice continued. But now you're part of it. That's how it works. Who are you? She demanded, trying to steady her voice. Silence. I've been watching longer than you've been alive. The Holloways were only the first. You think you're uncovering the truth, but you're just entering the frame. The line went dead. Mara sat with the phone pressed to her ear, the dial tone buzzing. Her reflection in the darkened screen looked unfamiliar. Trained by instinct, she reached for her recorder and pressed record. Her voice shook as she spoke. Log entry 5. Anonymous call received. Male voice, calm, controlled. Confirmed knowledge of photographs. Implied continuity. Holloways were only the beginning. Phrase used. You're part of it. That's how it works. Suggests deliberate ritualization of photography has control. She clicked the recorder off and shoved it into her bag. She couldn't stay in the studio. If he had taken her photo outside the Holloway house, he could find her here. She stuffed the Polaroids back into the burlap sack, locked them inside a metal box, and bolted it shut. The night outside was windless, eerily still. She drove aimlessly at first, turning down unfamiliar streets, trying to throw off anyone who might follow. She ended up in a 24-hour diner off the interstate, the kind with fluorescent lights too bright and coffee that tasted like burnt tar. She sat in a booth with her back to the wall, eyes on the door, sipping slowly, watching strangers filter in and out. The photos haunted her thoughts. One in particular, a child, maybe 8, sitting on the cellar floor with a stuffed rabbit in her lap. The rabbit's ear was torn. Mara remembered seeing that rabbit in the corner of the crawl space. Not rotted, not destroyed recent. Her hands went cold. That meant the cellar wasn't just a place of the past. Someone was still using it. She called Thomas Bell. He answered grudgingly, his voice rough with sleep. "Mara, do you know what time it is?" "I found more photos," she said quickly. "Not just the Holloways, dozens more, and one of me." Silence on the line. Then, "One of you?" "Yes. Taken 2 nights ago. That means he's still in the house. He's still watching." Jesus Christ. Thomas was fully awake now. "Where are you?" "A diner off I-10. I can't go home." "I'll come to you. Don't move." 20 minutes later, he slid into the booth across from her. He looked older than she remembered, hair thinning, eyes lined, but steady. She pushed the sack across the table. He opened it, saw the Polaroids, and went pale. "This is bigger than anything the cops will touch," he muttered. "These aren't just trophies." He cataloged them, year after year, like a collection. "And he's still adding to it," Mara said. Thomas sifted through the stack, stopping at one. A woman with long blonde hair, hands bound, eyes empty. "I knew her," he whispered. "Name was Carla. Went missing in '83. We all thought she ran away, but she didn't." He set the photo down like it burned. Mara leaned forward. "If these people were never found, their names were buried with the Holloways. But if I can identify them, if I can put their names to these faces, then we prove it's not just legend. We prove this is still happening." Thomas looked at her grimly. "And what then? You think the cops will suddenly care after 50 years? Mara swallowed hard. "Then we show the world." Before he could answer, a low buzz sounded from Mara's phone. A new message. Unknown number again. She hesitated, then opened it. It was a photo. Her and Thomas sitting at the diner booth, taken from outside the window only moments ago. Mara's stomach turned to ice. She turned toward the glass. Across the parking lot, a car idled under a broken streetlight. She couldn't see the driver. The headlights flicked on once, like a signal, then went dark. Thomas swore under his breath. "He's here." Mara gripped the Polaroids tighter. Whoever he was, he hadn't just pulled her into the story. He was writing the next frame. They didn't wait for the check. Thomas slid 2 20s under the salt shaker, and they moved, not fast enough to draw eyes, not slow enough to feel like they were pretending, straight through the kitchen where a teenager in a paper hat blinked at them and held the swinging door open with an elbow. The back lot smelled like fryer oil and hot asphalt, the kind of stink that sticks in your clothes. And beyond the dumpsters, the idling car sat under a busted streetlight like a patient animal. Hood dark, no plates on the front. Mara lifted her. Camera on reflex, snapped 3 frames hood ornament, windshield corner, a sliver of the driver's arm, and the flash popped hard, white against the dark. The car's headlights blinked once again in that deliberate way and cut off. "Back door," Thomas murmured, steering her along the cinder block wall to his battered Tacoma, key already in his fist. They slid in, and he started the engine, pulled. Out with his signal on like a regular churchgoer, merged onto the feeder road, let 2 semis and a minivan act as cover. The car followed, 2 lengths back, lights low, no rush, like it had nowhere else it needed to be. Mara watched it in the side mirror, pulse drum hard in her throat, tried to calm herself by cataloging details the way she always did square. Silhouette, older domestic sedan, one headlight warmer than the other. A parking garage scrape along the passenger side. Thomas took the next exit, then looped through a gas station and back onto the on-ramp, then ducked into the Hospital E loop where cameras watched every angle. The car eased past the entrance and kept going like it was bored of them. "Good," Thomas said, though his mouth was tight. "Plate?" "No front," Mara said, flipping her DSLR screen. Frame 3 caught something, the lower edge of a vanity plate mounted in the windshield, like a temp tag or an old dealer badge, blue and white stripe, faded, the corner of a number 7KX. She texted the crop to Dominic with a single line: "Run this style plus 7KX plus Arizona dealer badges. 1990s, 2000s. Dominic pinged back fast 3 possibilities, all tied to defunct lots that folded into a shell called Sun Valley Holdings. He sent an address for a mail drop and a storage facility registered to the same shell. Desert Star Storage, Unit F12. Out by the rail spur. "We shouldn't," Thomas said. "We have to," Mara said. They didn't say more after that, because the words felt fragile, like speaking them would spook whatever luck they had left. Desert Star sat at the edge of town, the kind of place you rent when you need to be in visible low cinder block buildings. A keypad gate, a night office with a plastic bell, and a handwritten "Back at 7 a.m. sign. The gate hung open. F12. Was 3 rows down, metal roll-up, new padlock, but the kind you buy in a hurry. Thomas pulled a small pry bar from behind his seat, worked the hasp with the quiet patience of someone who'd broken into his own garage before. The shackle popped. The door rattled up. Cold air and the smell of chemistry and dust rolled out like breath. A darkroom lived inside that box and larger, trays. A red safe light still glowing on a timer. Multi-outlet strips feeding an old mini-fridge buzzing low. Shelves of binders labeled in thin block letters. 1972 to 1975, 1976, 1979. Continuity. Watchers, and on the lowest shelf, a new binder with a sticker. Current, do not remove. Mara's hands shook, and she kept them still by counting. 1 shelf, 2, 3. Then the corkboard pushpins on a city map. Blue string from Sycamore Street to a strip mall, to a bus depot, to a church thrift, to their diner. Her mouth went dry. Thomas whistled, no humor in it. "This isn't a hoard," he said. "This is a system." Mara opened Current. Inside were 8x10s on archival sleeves, her outside the fence. Her and Thomas in the booth. Thomas, pumping gas last week. Dominic stepping into his lab with a coffee. The last page was blank, except for a typed sheet. Friday 2 p.m. Ferry Street. Underpass proof of life M.R. to deliver. Proof of life, Thomas repeated. Mara photographed every page, fast, steady, then pointed the sheet. "It's bait or a schedule he never thought we'd see," she said. The mini-fridge hummed. A motion sensor at the door gave a soft double chirp. Thomas froze. "We tripped something," he breathed. They killed the red light, peeled the power strip, stood still until their ears found the outside, the low rumble of a passing train, the drag of a shoe on gravel, the click of a key touching metal. The roll-up door jerked an inch. Someone tested. The lock, found it gone, stopped. Mara slipped sideways behind the shelving unit, pressed her spine to cool steel, lifted her camera, and thumbed the ISO high. Thomas moved to the other side of the door, pry bar raised but not like a weapon, more like a lever waiting for a purpose. The door lifted slow. A slice of night widened. A figure ducked under tall. Windbreaker, a cap pulled low, a mask like. A painter's respirator. The beam of a small flashlight cut a thin line across the floor. It found the empty lock, the unplugged strips, the open binder. The man didn't panic. He breathed, slow and even, then spoke toward the room like a teacher. Who knew the kids were hiding in the same old place? "Mara," he said. Hearing her name with her own echo in that tin box felt like teeth on glass. "You shouldn't take what isn't yours." Thomas moved a half step, tight and coiled. The man's flashlight swung toward the sound, and Mara fired. The DSLR popped, white, hard. The man flinched, and Thomas kicked the door hard, sending it bouncing up into its track. Daylight from the safety lights outside spilled in, and the man stumbled back 2 steps, then recovered like he'd practiced recovering. Mara grabbed the current binder, and the slim one marked watchers, slung them into her tote. The man saw the motion and didn't chase. Instead, he reached into his pocket and set something on the concrete, a key fob with a cheap rabbit's foot. Same torn ear charm from the photo. "Proof," he said. "You keep asking for proof." Then he stepped back into the dark and was gone. By the time they hit the gravel, the lane was empty and the gate was open like before. Thomas locked the unit with a fresh padlock he bought from the vending machine on instinct, as if a lock could give them a minute's head start. "He wanted us to find it," Mara said as they drove. "He staged the room, left the light on, wrote the note. Then why test the lock?" Thomas said, "To see if we'd run or reach," Mara said. "Either way, he gets the photo of who we are." Dominic buzzed again, the 7KX style match tied to a blue dealer tag used by a lot that closed in 2003. Sun Valley rolled into a holding that paid storage fees on 5 units across 3 counties. He sent a PDFA receipt stamped earlier that week for unit F12. The credit card field was blank. Paid with a cashier's check. The issuing bank? Lark & Sons Credit Union. "Old Union Bank," Thomas said. "City workers used it. Cops too." "Dreyfus's World," Mara said without meaning to. They rode silence to Dominic's lab, and he met them at the loading dock with a look that told them he'd watched the enabling pixels on his screen and understood too much too fast. He scanned the binders, lifted the fingerprints on the binder rings like he was skimming a book for its last chapter. None were good enough for a match in the systems he could touch. Inside watchers they found lists, not victims, but visitors' dates. And initials, places like June's, Depot 5, Charity Shop. Little notes in a neat hand. Curious, hungry, will return with friend. Talks to herself. Records. In the back, a single page with 8 names spelled out. 7 had lines through them. The 8th did not. Mara Row, Friday 2 p.m. "He assigns arcs," Dominic said. "He watches the watchers until they lean in. Then he writes the ending," Mara said, tasting metal. "They didn't have until Friday. They had now." Dominic cracked the bank routing number on the storage receipt and came up with a PO box at a strip mall called Blue Mesa Mail. Mara and Thomas drove. The clerk didn't ask for ID when Mara slid 100 across the counter and said she was there for the pickup on 84. The clerk shrugged, brought out a manila envelope and a small locker key stamped Station 12. Inside the envelope, another typed sheet. "If you can't stop yourself, you may as well keep going." And a single Polaroid Lydia from Chapter 2. No, not Lydia. A different woman, mid-30s, eyes empty, a newspaper held under her chin with yesterday's date. Proof of life. The locker lived at the bus station. Station 12 yielded a hard case camera bag with a working Super 8 inside and 3 cartridges. Thomas turned one over in his hands. The tape on it read, "Vault." The handwriting matched the binders. Mara wanted to run. She wanted to hand it all to people with badges and pensions and let them make their tidy piles. Instead, she did the thing she knew how to do. She looked. She threaded the Super 8 at Dominic's lab while he patched the output into a digital recorder. The first reel flickered an image of a concrete room, not the Sycamore cellar, but cousin-shaped low ceiling, a painted line 2 feet up the wall like something industrial. A girl sat on a chair that had rubber feet. A voice off camera said, "Hold the paper, honey," and a small hand lifted a grocery flyer. The second reel showed shelves with cameras and an arm reaching in to arrange them like figurines. The third reel was the worst, and the most useful a panning shot of all. Of metal tags stamped with years and towns. Prescott, Holbrook, Winslow, Gallup. One tag read Larkspur Motel 12. Thomas swore. "That place is dead and gutted," he said. "Shut down in '99. Mara froze. "Not dead," she said, thinking of the typed sheet, "Friday 2 p.m. ferry. Street underpass. Ferry ran behind Larkspur. You could get to the old service bay from there. It's a stage," she said. "He sets it the way a theater sets a scene and invites us to play our role." Thomas looked sick. "We don't go." He said. "We're already in it," she said. "But we choose where we stand." She called the one cop she half trusted. Not to confess, not to plead, but to put a clock on the record. Voicemail took her call. She left a clean, tight message. Anonymous tip. Evidence of a living victim staged at the Larkspur Motel service. Bay near Ferry Street at 2 p.m. Friday. Look for an interior bay behind a corrugated door. You'll need bolt cutters. Come with medics. She hung up and didn't add her name. She didn't need to. The network would carry it. She slept 2 hours on Dominic's break room couch and woke to a text from an unknown number that didn't have words. Just a live photo that played when she pressed it, grainy, shaky, the hall. Outside her studio door, someone standing just out of frame, humming under their breath. Her stomach hollowed. "He's in my building," she said. Thomas and Dominic packed in minutes. They drove to Mara's studio through noon traffic that felt like it was wading through someone else's dream. The hallway was empty. The door showed no damage, but inside, the smell of cold air and old fixer had deepened. On her desk, where the 3 Polaroids had sat the night she first developed them, someone had placed a new one, crisp and fresh and wet at the edges. It showed the Ferry Street underpass in soft afternoon light and 2 silhouettes stepping into the service bay. In the bottom border, typed, not handwritten, the caption read, "Every audience needs a front row." Mara stared until the picture stopped feeling like ink and started feeling like instruction. "We're not the audience," she said quietly. "We're the interruption." She put the new photo in her pocket, checked her batteries, checked her recorder, and for the first time since this started, she said the thing she'd been avoiding. "If we get there first, we buy a life a little. Time. If we get there with proof, we buy a lot of lives, a lot of time. Let's go." Thomas didn't argue. The Tacoma turned toward Ferry Street, with the sun sitting high and the day looking like any other day, which was how you knew it was. About to turn. The underpass was already baking by the time Mara and Thomas rolled in. 2 hours before the note's time, the sun above painting everything in flat white light that erased shadows but made every edge cruel. The Larkspur Motel sat gutted, its sign rusted into unreadable metal, windows boarded, graffiti thick across the cinder block. But the service bay doors along the back were intact, corrugated metal streaked with rust. Ferry Street was nearly empty, just the odd pickup rolling past, a kid on a BMX who didn't even glance at them. Thomas parked 2 blocks down, nose out for a fast exit, and they walked in pretending to be bored surveyors, clipboards in hand. Dominic had stayed behind at the lab, promised to keep a live line open, watching through Mara's bodycam feed piped into his monitors. The bay door they wanted was marked by a faint X scratched in the paint, just as the Super 8 film had shown. Mara's stomach tightened, too deliberate, too theatrical. They circled first, found the back fenced, topped with barbed coil, one gap where the fence sagged toward a drainage ditch. They ducked through. Behind the service bay wall, the ground dipped. The concrete foundation jutted out like a platform. There was a vent, the slats wide enough for light to leak through. Mara crouched, pressed her ear to it. A hum inside, electrical. And something else scrape of chair legs on floor. She jolted back. Someone was inside now. Thomas whispered, "If this is a trap, we're already in it." She steadied her breathing. "If there's proof of life, we don't walk away." They tried the bay door. Locked with a chain looped twice. Padlock new, cheap hardware store type. Thomas set to work with the bolt cutters they'd borrowed from Dominic. The chain clattered once, too loud. They froze, waited, but nothing stirred. He pulled the door a foot up. Inside smelled of mildew and burnt wiring. Mara slid under, camera ready, and Thomas followed. The service bay was gutted concrete. Low ceiling, fluorescent tubes buzzing. A tripod stood at the far end with a Polaroid camera mounted on it, aimed at a chair in the center. On the chair sat a woman, alive, eyes open. She looked mid-30s, her wrists tied with nylon cord, her ankles shackled to the chair legs. Her hair was stringy, face gaunt, but she was breathing. And clutched in her lap was a folded newspaper with that day's date. Proof of life, staged exactly like the photo. Mara rushed forward, but Thomas grabbed her shoulder. "Wait, look." Above, in the rafters, a red light blinked. A camera. Then another. 4 ringed around the space. Every move they made was being filmed. Mara's skin crawled. The woman in the chair turned her head slowly toward them, lips parting, but no sound came out. Just the barest shake of her head, as if to say, "Don't single quotes T. Mara," whispered, "It's theater. We're actors in his set." Thomas hissed, "So what's the script?" The woman's lips formed one word, "Run." And then the bay door slammed down behind them, chain clattering back into place from the outside. Darkness swallowed half the room as the fluorescence flickered. A speaker crackled in the corner. That same voice from the cellar, calm, deep, instructive. "You came early, curious, hungry. I knew you would. Don't free her yet. She's not ready. She hasn't learned her lines." Mara raised her camera, fired the shutter flash, lit the room stark white. The woman winced. The red lights blinked in response. The voice chuckled. "You document, I document. That's balance. But you've broken it. You take without giving." Thomas swung his pry bar toward the nearest camera, smashed it in one blow. Sparks fell. The voice didn't falter. "Break all of them if you want. I already have the negatives." Mara shouted, "Where's Beth's daughter? Where's Lily?" Silence then. "The child is mine no longer. You gave her away. But there are others, always others." From somewhere behind the walls, faint scratching. The same sound Mara had heard in the crawl space weeks before. Only now it multiplied. Scratches, soft knocks, as if several hands pressed from the other side. Thomas's jaw clenched. "We need to move." Mara approached the woman. Her wrists were raw beneath the cords. Mara slid her pocket knife carefully, sawed through. "We're getting you out," she whispered. The woman shook her head again, whispered back, "He never lets them leave." The overhead fluorescence died. For 3 seconds only the red lights glowed. Then flood lamps blazed on at floor level, angled up, throwing grotesque shadows on the walls. Across the far concrete wall, photographs appeared, dozens of Polaroids pinned in neat rows. Women, men, children, posed in that same chair, each with a newspaper, each marked with dates. Some photos yellowed with age, some fresh. At the bottom row, 2 images of Mara herself, candid shots taken from across the diner parking lot, got her heart hammered. He'd planned this scene before they even touched the storage unit. The woman in the chair began to sob quietly. Mara finished, cutting her free, pulled her up. She staggered, but could stand. Thomas wrenched the side door with his crowbar, wood splintering, metal frame giving. Alarms didn't blare too easy. They slipped into a narrow hallway lit only by an exit sign. The walls were lined with mirrors. Cheap, warped, nailed directly to drywall in each reflection. Mara thought she saw movement behind them, not their own, but tall silhouettes drifting just out of sync. Her breath turned ragged. "Don't look," Thomas snapped. "Keep moving." They burst through the final door into the ditch behind the motel. Sunlight hit them like salvation. The woman collapsed into the weeds, gasping, clutching the newspaper to her chest as if it anchored her. From the motel roof, a single Polaroid fluttered down, drifting like a lazy leaf. Mara caught it before it hit the mud. It was them Thomas, and the rescued woman, in that very moment, stepping out the door. Impossible. She turned it over. On the back, typed neat, "Front row, Act 1. Sirens echoed distant police. Maybe the tip had landed. But Mara knew it wasn't over. This was only the first curtain. The scratches in the walls proved it. There were more survivors or more captives still staged in other sets. And whoever held the camera hadn't finished watching. Thomas pulled Mara to her feet. "We've been drafted into his play," he said. "Now we either quit or we see the ending." Mara looked down at the Polaroid again. The ink was still damp. "No," she said softly. "We don't see his ending. We write ours." And as the sirens closed in, as the motel walls loomed silent and rotting behind them, she knew Act 2 was already waiting. The desert night pressed heavy over the highway as Mara drove north with Thomas and the rescued woman, who still hadn't spoken more than 3 words since they pulled her from the motel. She sat in the back seat, newspaper clutched like armor, eyes fixed out the window as if watching something only she could see. The headlights carved tunnels of light through the black, the radio silent, every mile thick with the knowledge they had just played into someone else's script. Dominic was on the line, patched through the car's speaker. "I scanned the Polaroid you sent. The ink isn't standard. It's thermographic, modern. Whoever printed that card had access to commercial-grade gear. This isn't some hobbyist." Mara tightened her grip on the wheel. "He knew exactly when we'd leave. He had the photo before we took the step." "That's impossible," Dominic said. Thomas muttered. "So is a house hiding crawl spaces for 50 years. But here we are." They reached a safe house by midnight, a derelict roadside cabin Dominic had secured under a fake trust. Inside, the air smelled of mothballs and old pine. Thomas swept it quickly, checked windows, bolted doors. The woman curled up in a corner chair, clutching her newspaper, rocking slightly. Mara knelt in front of her. "What's your name?" The woman's lips moved. "Ruth, just that." Rasp, almost inaudible. "Ruth, you're safe now. No cameras, no chains. But I need to know, was he there?" Her eyes darted upward, to the rafters, then the corners of the room, like she expected the red lights to be watching. She shook her head violently. "Then?" whispered. "Not him. Them." Mara froze. "Them?" Ruth pressed the newspaper tighter against her chest and refused to say more. Thomas lit a cigarette by the back door, his hands shaking. "She's broken," he said quietly. He or they trained her for that chair, for the camera. It's ritual. Mara sat down opposite him, but she knew enough to tell us to run. There's still a mind behind the fear. And she said, "Them." That means multiple operators, not just one. Before Thomas could answer, Dominic's voice came back over the line, urgent. "Check your perimeter now. I just picked up a frequency spike near your cabin. Something's pinging your location." Thomas stormed outside with his flashlight, sweeping the tree line. Mara followed, heart thundering. 10 feet from the cabin, door half buried in the dirt, lay a small plastic case, no bigger than a pager. A tracker. Mara crushed it under her boot. Too late. From the highway came the low hum of an engine van headlights cutting through the night, slowing as they passed. The dirt road leading to the cabin. "Inside," Thomas barked. They killed the lights, crouched in the dark. The van idled for a long minute at the turnoff, then rolled on, tires crunching gravel. The silence it left was worse than its arrival. Back inside, Ruth whispered again. "He always knows. He told me. The play doesn't end until someone dies on stage." Mara tried to steady her voice. "Ruth, how long were you there? How many others did you see?" She shook her head, hair falling across her face. "Rooms, mirrors, not one house, many. He moved us. The weight of it landed like a hammer. Not one house, not one camera operator, an entire system." Thomas slammed his fist against the wall. "This isn't just some ghost story we're chasing. This is organized, Mara. A network." Before Mara could answer, Ruth's gaze fixed past them, over their shoulders, her face drained of color. Mara spun. In the window's reflection, just for a heartbeat, a silhouette stood at the tree lined tall, shoulders too broad, head slightly tilted. By the time she turned, the yard was empty. The cabin felt smaller with every passing second. The woman rocked harder, whispering fragments of sentences. "Don't smile. Don't move. Don't breathe when the lens is open." Mara grabbed her. Recorder, hit record, log entry. Subject rescued alive from motel. Identified herself as Ruth. States there are multiple operators, multiple houses. Evidence suggests systemic captivity and staged photography across decades. Network scope unknown. Subject deeply conditioned to ritual phrases. Surveillance ongoing, even in current safe location. Immediate relocation required. Thomas stubbed, his cigarette out hard. "We can't stay here." Ruth finally looked at them, her voice firmer now. "You can't run either. Once you're in the film, you stay in it." And at that moment, Dominic's voice cut in again, flat and cold. "Mara, Thomas, I just got a package delivered to my lab. No return address. Inside is a Polaroid of you three right now in that cabin, sitting exactly where you're sitting." Mara's blood iced. She hadn't heard a shudder, hadn't seen a flash. Thomas whispered the only word that fit. Scripted. And outside, somewhere in the dark beyond the trees, a faint whir of a camera motor wound, slow and patient. They. Next act already begun. The cabin was no longer a refuge, it was a stage. Mara could feel it in her bones, as if invisible lights had flicked on, framing them where they sat. Ruth clutched her knees, rocking harder, murmuring over and over, "Don't break the frame. Don't break the frame." Thomas paced near the door, jaw tight, every so often peering through the cracks in the boarded window. Mara sat with her recorder, hands trembling but steady enough to hit record. "Log entry 9, she whispered. "We've confirmed they're watching us in real time. Polaroid of our current location arrived at Dominic's lab within hours. Transmission speed suggests proximity. This isn't a memory, it's a live performance." The air pressed thick around them. Even without looking outside, Mara knew someone was there. The faint electric buzz of a generator, the hum of a camera motor winding. A lens waiting to blink. Thomas finally broke the silence. "We can't sit here like rabbits. If they're filming us, they want us frozen. That's the ritual. We need to move." "Move where?" Mara shot back. "Every place we go, they're already ahead of us. This isn't one man with a camera. It's a network, and it's wired into the landscape." Ruth said there are many houses. At her name, Ruth's head snapped up. Her eyes were wide, fever bright. "Not houses," she rasped. "Sets, each room built for the scene. Dining tables, hallways, cellars. He calls them his theaters. Thomas swore under his breath. So we're in one now. A theater dressed up as a safe house. Before Mara could answer, the lights flickered. Not from the power grid, the cabin had no electricity, but from a portable lantern Dominic had supplied. It dimmed, sputtered, then went dark, leaving only the thin slice of moonlight through the boards. Then, a sound. Not from outside. From above, footsteps, slow, deliberate, creaking across the roof. Ruth whimpered and curled tighter into herself. When the footsteps start, she whispered, the curtain is about to rise. Thomas grabbed the crowbar he'd leaned against the wall, muscles tight. He's not getting in, not tonight. Mara's heart hammered. She forced her voice. Steady. Thomas, if this is staged, fighting might be exactly what they want. Violence framed is still performance. Better performance than being puppets, he snapped. Then the sound shifted. No longer footsteps, but the slow drag of something heavy across the roof. A metallic scrape, like chains. And then a thud, directly above the chair where Ruth sat. Dust rained from the ceiling. Ruth screamed, bolting from the chair into the corner. Mara lunged after her, but the woman pressed her hands against the wall, shaking her head violently. Don't move the chair. Never move the chair. Thomas pulled Mara back. She's right. That chair's a marker. He's testing us. The thud stopped. Silence fell so complete that Mara could hear her pulse in her ears. Then came the whir again, the unmistakable sound of a Polaroid ejecting. From the porch, Thomas yanked the door open, crowbar raised, but the porch was empty. Only a single photo lay face down on the boards. He snatched it up and brought it inside. Mara hesitated, then turned it over. It showed the cabin interior, the same room they were standing in. Ruth in the corner, Thomas by the door, Mara with the recorder in hand. The only difference, in the photo, a fourth figure stood behind Mara, face obscured by shadow, one hand raised as if reaching for her shoulder. The blood drained from her face. Thomas, do you see this? He nodded grimly. It's him. Or one of them. Ruth began to laugh, then a broken, high sound that didn't belong in her throat. You're part of it now. Don't you see? You made the scene. You looked at the picture. That's how it begins, Mara snapped. Ruth, listen. To me. If you know what comes next, you have to tell us. Her laughter stopped as suddenly as it had begun. She leaned forward, eyes hollow, and whispered, Next, someone exits. That's the rule. No scene ends without an exit. As if on cue, the van's engine roared back to life outside. Headlights blazed through the cracks, flooding the room with slashes of white. Thomas grabbed Mara's arm. We can't wait for him to choose who exits. We decide. Mara's mind raced. The tunnel. Every house has one. Ruth, where is it? The woman shook her head frantically, biting her nails until they bled. Mara grabbed her shoulders. Where is it? Finally, Ruth pointed at the floor, beneath the rotting rug. Thomas tore it back with the crowbar, revealing a hatch half rotted through. A hidden ladder descended into darkness. The headlights outside clicked off. The engine silenced. Whoever was in the van had killed the noisebot. Not left. Mara flicked her recorder back on. Log entry 9 continued. Discovered concealed tunnel beneath cabin. Lights and sounds confirm external staging. Subject insists every scene requires an exit. We're choosing ours. Thomas dropped into the tunnel first, crowbar strapped to his back. Ruth followed, shaking uncontrollably. Mara lowered herself. Last, pulling the hatch shut above them, the ladder descended 30 feet before spilling into a narrow corridor. Damp earth walls reinforced with wooden beams. The air reeked of mildew. As they moved, faint echoes reached them, mechanical hums. The distant click of shutters dot the corridor forked. On the left, faint light flickered. On the right, total blackness. Ruth froze. Left is stage. Right is off-script. But off-script is worse. Thomas tightened his grip on the crowbar. Then we go left. At least we'll see what we're walking into. They followed the light. The corridor widened into a chamber lined with shelves. On them sat rows of Polaroid cameras, all different models, each pointing inward at a single wooden chair. Above it, a bare bulb buzzed weakly. On the chair lay a fresh photograph. Mara picked it up. Throat-dry dot, it showed the three of them, already standing in the chamber, Ruth clutching her newspaper, Thomas with his crowbar, Mara with her recorder. But in the photograph, the chair was not empty. A man sat in it, his face blurred, his hand resting casually on the armrest, watching them. Mara's voice cracked. Thomas, we just walked into a set that already developed itself. Ruth covered her face with her hands. The exit has been chosen, she whispered. One of us won't leave this frame. And as the bulb above them flickered, the sound of another Polaroid motor wound slowly from the shadows, preparing to capture the next act. The chamber's air was thick, almost wet, and every breath carried the metallic taste of dust and chemicals. Mara held the photograph tighter than she realized, the paper bending under her grip. Thomas paced the room, eyes darting between the shelves of cameras and the single chair in the center. Ruth stayed pressed against the wall, whispering half-formed words to herself, rocking as though trying to vanish into the bricks. The bulb above the chair buzzed, dimmed, then flared. For a heartbeat, the chamber was washed in blinding light. When it steadied, another photograph had appeared on the chair. Mara stepped forward slowly, every muscle in her body taut, and picked it up. This one was different. It wasn't the three of them in the room. It was the exit tunnel, shot from the far end, where the wooden beams curved into shadow. A silhouette stood there, just tall enough, just vague enough that it could have been anyone. Or everyone, someone's. Waiting for us, Thomas muttered. Jaw clenched. Mara studied the photo closer. The silhouette wasn't still. The edges blurred, faint streaks across the film, as if the figure had been caught moving. Pacing, impatient, she shoved it into her. Bag, we have to keep moving. Sitting here means becoming part of the set. Ruth's laughter was sudden and sharp. You're already part of it. Don't you get it? Every breath, every look, every step, it's all being framed. Thomas snapped. Enough. His voice cracked through the chamber. The shelves rattled. One of the cameras clicked. A fresh photo ejected, falling onto the floor with a faint slap. They froze. Thomas bent, picked it up, and swore under his breath. It was a photo of him, at this exact moment, standing with the photo in his hand. Behind him, though, Mara could see her own blurred outline, and next to it, something else. A tall figure, out of proportion, just far enough in the shadows to look wrong. Mara's chest tightened. We're not alone. As if to confirm it, the corridor behind them echoed with the sound of footsteps, slow, dragging, deliberate. Thomas raised the crowbar. Run. They didn't argue. Ruth bolted first, her thin frame surprisingly quick, vanishing into the tunnel. Mara followed, her recorder clutched tight in her hand, every breath burning her lungs. Thomas was last, his boots hammering against the dirt. The tunnel narrowed. The air grew colder, staler. They reached a split in the path, one side collapsing inward, the other sloping upward into faint light. Without speaking, they chose the light dot. It ended in a wooden hatch, the planks warped but intact. Thomas slammed the crowbar against it, once, twice, until it gave way. They spilled into a room that smelled of mildew and rot. It wasn't freedom. They were in another set, a living room frozen in time. Mid-1970s decor, mustard couches, shag carpet, A static-filled television, buzzing faintly, though unplugged. The coffee table, 3 cups of tea sat steaming untouched. Ruth screamed and covered her eyes. "It's the playroom. He brings them here first." Thomas grabbed her by the shoulders. "Where's the exit?" But she only wept. Mara forced herself to walk deeper into the room. The walls were lined with photographs, all framed, all Polaroids. Families sitting stiffly in chairs, children with empty smiles, women with downcast eyes. Dozens of them. Maybe. Hundreds. She pulled one from the wall. Her stomach dropped. It was Ruth, decades younger, barely a teenager, sitting in the same living room, a cup of tea in her lap, her expression blank. Mara turned to Ruth, horrified. "You've been here before." Ruth's face twisted, her voice a broken whisper. "I never left." Before Mara could answer, the static on the television flared. The screen brightened, shapes flickering through the noise. For a moment, Mara thought she saw herself, her own face, Lev, staring back in grainy black and white. The whir of a Polaroid camera sounded from the corner. A photo slid out onto the carpet. Thomas picked it up, hands shaking. He didn't show them. He just muttered, "It's the 3 of us." But only 2 make it out. The room grew colder. The television hissed louder. And from the doorway leading deeper into the house, another shadow stretched long across the carpet, step by step, until it nearly touched their feet. Mara forced, her recorder on, her voice trembling but clear. Log entry 10. "We've reached what may be the final set. The walls are covered with lives stolen, faces erased, stories buried. Someone is still here, still watching, still directing. If this is the last tape, know this: we tried to escape the frame. We tried to break the script. But if you're hearing this, the house still has its actors. And somewhere behind the lens, the watcher waits." The shadow darkened. The cameras clicked. And the final curtain began to fall.